People usually see the world in one of two ways, either as a forum for action or as a place for things. The latter, place for things, is usually assumed in the hard sciences. It appears to me that whoever wrote the narrative of Genesis 1 assumed the former, the world as a forum of action. On this point, Jordan B. Peterson writes, "The former manner of interpretation, more primordial and less clearly understood, finds its expression in the arts or humanities, in ritual, drama, literature, and in mythology. The world as a forum for action is a place of value, a place where all things have meaning. This meaning, which is shaped as a consequence of social interaction, is implication for action, or, at a higher level of analysis, implication for the configuration of the interpretive schema that produces or guides action. In the way of seeing the world that I maintain was assumed by the author of Genesis 1, the world is a forum for action because it is a place where all things have meaning. The meaning or value with which the world is imbued in Genesis 1 is that the world is God's creation, and the meaning or value that human beings have in this world is that they are the image of God. This meaning is what is supposed to guide the actions of those who saw the world in this way. Actions and behaviors are deemed appropriate or inappropriate according to the meaning ascribed to the world in which these beings act, and the meaning ascribed to these beings who act in this world. I can also add there the meaning ascribed to the actions performed by these beings. If this is indeed the way that the world was understood in the community out of which this narrative emerged, then biblical, literalistic, and creationistic readings of this text will not serve my hermeneutical purposes on this channel. This is because in these approaches, Genesis 1 is interpreted as a literal, historically and scientifically accurate account of how the world came to be. This indicates that in biblical literalism, particularly as it manifests itself in creationism, historical and scientific accuracy are indispensable measures of truth. If Genesis 1 is not historically and scientifically accurate, then it is not true according to this view. This is a way of seeking truth that can be traced back to René Descartes. Descartes was after certitude, and the method he developed in order to acquire it was one of radical doubt. He refused to accept anything as true without enough proof. He questioned everything around him, everything he knew and everything he believed, searching for the thing which he would not be able to question, doubt, and falsify, so that he could ground all his knowledge and beliefs, or better yet his epistemology, on that which he himself cannot doubt. This led him to doubt the reality of everything except for himself. Here is his own explanation. But immediately I noticed that while I was trying thus to think everything false, it was necessary that I, who was thinking this, was something, and observing that this truth, I am thinking, therefore I exist, was so firm and sure that all the most extravagant suppositions of the skeptics was incapable of shaking it, I decided that I could accept it without scruple as the first principle of the philosophy I was seeking. For Descartes, the I who methodically doubts was the only thing that cannot be falsified. On this point, Caputo writes, "If I doubt, I think, and if I think, I am." From the cogito, he proceeded to deduce the existence of God, who is the author of our nature and the guarantee that if we use our faculties properly and not rush to judgment, we will find the truth. Truth, veritas, was a function of divine veracity. God, who used to be identical with truth, is now reduced to supplying a lifetime warranty on his products. But the warranty was only valid if we follow the instructions on the label and did not abuse the product. The instructions read, "Judge only upon matters that are clear and distinct, and do not rush to judgment." Before the Enlightenment, according to what we just read by Caputo, truth was synonymous with God, not with reason. It is only because of the Enlightenment that truth was divorced from God and became interchangeable with reason. The function that God and truth played before the Enlightenment was transferred to reason in the course of the Enlightenment. Truth became synonymous with reason. This was a mistake, as reason was not well suited for this task. Ronald E. Osborne points out the problem with biblical literalism and creationism in the following way. First and foremost, scientific creationism reflects a relatively recent notion. This notion is shared ironically, though not coincidentally, by many thoroughgoing naturalists that all truth claims must be stacked one atop another, like the bricks to a house, beginning from an indubitable, firm foundation. For the secular humanists, everything dances to the music of reason, including the belief in the existence of God. However, in the case of secular humanists and naturalists, the conclusion is that God does not exist. For biblical literalists and creationists, everything also dances to the music of reason, including the belief in the existence of God. However, in this case, the conclusion is that God does in fact exist, and the historical and scientific accuracy of Genesis 1 are indispensable because they are part of the rational proof that leads to this conclusion. In both the secular or naturalistic approach and biblical literalism or creationism, reason is foundational to all belief, and reason begins with the one who doubts. Therefore, the existence of the one who doubts is the foundation of all belief, even the belief in God. Even though biblical literalism is a response to the secular and naturalist dismissal of God, it carries with it the seeds of its own destruction because it accepts the presuppositions which are the root of the secular rationalist rejection of God. Biblical literalism makes the mistake of trying to take the stories which have as their background the view of the world as a forum for action and pass them off as actually assuming the background of the world as a place for things. If I am correct in asserting that the narrative of Genesis 1 is hopelessly tied to the view of the world as a forum for action, then in trying to frame it as a product of the view of the world as a place for things, or as a scientifically and historically accurate narrative, one inevitably radically breaks with the ancient wisdom the narrative dramatizes and preserves, and for all intents and purposes invents a new narrative. I am generally okay with creativity and novelty. However, for the purposes of this series, we will do our best to engage the ancient wisdom this narrative imparts. Peterson writes, "How is it that complex and admirable ancient civilizations could have developed and flourished initially if they were predicated upon nonsense? If a culture survives and grows, does that not indicate in some profound way that the ideas it is based upon are valid? If myths are mere superstitious proto-theories, why did they work? Why were they remembered? Traditional societies predicated on religious notions have survived, essentially unchanged in some cases, for tens of thousands of years. How can this longevity be understood? Is it actually sensible to argue that persistently successful traditions are based on ideas that are simply wrong, regardless of their utility? Is it not more likely that we just do not know how it could be that traditional notions are right, given their appearance of extreme irrationality? Is it not more likely that this indicates modern philosophical ignorance rather than ancestral philosophical error?" Peterson continues just a bit later, "The cosmos described by mythology was not the same place known to the practitioners of modern science, but that does not mean it was not real." The word real in Peterson's quote can be substituted with the word truth, as I have been using it in this video. When this narrative is read against the backdrop of the world as a forum of action, then the truth it conveys is not that of a propositional nature, which is arrived at through historical and scientific accuracy. This is the kind of truth that built ancient civilizations. As we struggle to reform and build our own civilization today, would it not be foolish to disregard the wisdom of those who came before us, especially considering that this is a wisdom that worked as far as world building is concerned? I've spent the past 7 years trying to be more sensitive to this way of understanding the narrative of Genesis chapter 1, and I am still learning. It is clear to me, however, that whoever wrote this narrative did not write it in order for it to be chained to a pulpit in some church. It reads very well on the streets, or better yet, in the world. So, I have started working on a short series of relatively brief videos which I plan on posting on this YouTube channel, in which I will be attempting to give a reading that isn't dogmatic and is more worldly or political. So, I have entitled this series, The Politics of Genesis. The first episode of this series will be an attempt to reconstruct the matrix of meaning which would have driven the writing and editing of the narrative, as well as the way it would have been understood by its intended audience. I will juxtapose Genesis chapter 1 with the Mesopotamian creation narrative known as the Enuma Elish, which is a product of a connected matrix of meaning, and we'll compare the politics of Genesis with the politics of the Enuma Elish in an episode that will follow that.